looked at Voice of the Martyrs has like a map where it shows all the different countries of the world that are, it's either illegal or very restricted and dangerous
Yeah.
to own a Bible. And if you look at that map, those are the places basically that almost most of those places, those are the places that we're getting the most response from. Our top 15 languages last year, every single one of those countries, top 15 countries last year, every single one of those countries is on that map of places
That's incredible.
that the gospel is going through the Good and Evil Eye Missions project.
Welcome to In Light of the Gospel, episode 39. Today we'll be talking to a man from Tennessee. He originally was from Maryland and moved to Tennessee to help out with the Good and Evil project at No Greater Joy. The Good and Evil project is a comic book Bible, so to speak. It's not quite a Bible, but it points people to the Bible, and it specifically goes through the Old Testament books, through the Old Testament stories rather, and points to the idea and the concept of Christ and the cross and sacrifice and atonement, and it goes through into the New Testament and shows what Christ has done for us. And so it's not a perfect book, but it's an excellent tool to reach many people with the gospel. And what they've done now is made it available online, frame by frame on your phone, and you can download it in many different countries. And some of the darkest, most unreached countries is where it's being downloaded the most. And so I think you'll catch JD's passion and vision for this project that originally started with Mike and Debbie Pearl, but now he's projecting it out, and him and along with some other people projecting it out into the world in huge numbers. Some of the numbers that he talks about are going to be pretty amazing, I think, to you. So it's a way for all of us, even techie kind of people, to get involved with sharing the gospel with the whole world. So I appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully you'll share this video with people. Everybody needs to hear this, the fact that you can reach the world with the gospel, even through comic book form. So thanks again for tuning in. God bless you. Well, here we are, JD Grimes. Get to know you again. I had a conversation with you, just so the audience knows. We did record this a couple weeks ago, or tried to record, and I made some error, so we didn't get a recording. But so I know you a little bit now. I know a little bit of your story and kind of your upbringing, and I found it to be very intriguing. So hopefully we can retell it in a way that still engages the audience the same way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you were raised in Maryland.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's
Okay.
where I grew up. My dad has a farm there, and so I grew up a farm kid, homeschool kid, and how I ended up in Tennessee was through No Greater Joy. That's the only reason I'm here is because I came here to work. So
Right.
serve the Lord at the ministry. Yep.
Yeah, and the reason I know of you is because I know that you're involved with the Good and Evil Project, the online portion of it. I remember reading an article, it might have been quite a few years ago now, titled "I Missionaries," I believe it was.
Mhm.
So that's what kind of got me on to seeing you and recognizing your name whenever it came up. I'm like, oh, that's the I Missionaries guy. So
Yeah. No, it's been super cool to be a part of that. Yeah.
yeah, I'd love to get into more of that. I remember last time we talked about some of the stats and some of the numbers, which I definitely want the audience to hear. But for now, maybe let's give a brief background. What was your childhood like? How were you raised, so to speak?
Yeah, no, my parents both came from a at least nominally Christian background, and I think both went to like Methodist churches growing up. So when I was growing up, I was, like I said, a homeschool kid, and we attended a Presbyterian church until I was about 14, and at that point we realized we're really not Presbyterian, and we're not Calvinist, and we're not, so they never, like a lot of churches, they don't teach a lot of doctrinal stuff, at least not from the pulpit. In fact, the pastor there had kind of a philosophy of you don't do meat from the pulpit on Sunday morning. That's something for your Bible studies or Sunday school
Yeah.
or something. So it took us a while to realize that we're very much not doctrinally aligned with a lot of that. And then my parents had become familiar with the Pearls, with their books and with Mike's Bible teaching, and they realized that that was very, very biblically sound. And so through homeschooling and through that kind of thing, going to homeschool conventions, they got familiar with the Pearls books and materials. And so by the time I was about 14, they decided our kids are going to have a much better biblical foundation, biblical grounding, biblical understanding, if we stop trying to get our meat and potatoes from church and just listen to Michael Pearl on CD and study the Bible ourselves and read it as a family and that kind of thing. Um, so that's what I was raised in, and my parents are good people that love God and have served Him and walked in faith, and I have a goodly heritage of being able to see how God provided for them over the years. It's interesting. My mom was a computer programmer, which is a big part of kind of what I do, the tech side of things.
Yeah.
And she was working with pretty advanced scientific stuff. And when my mom and dad got married, then it was like, well, my dad and my mom together decided we want to mom to be a stay-at-home mom and raise our kids and bring them up in the Lord and homeschool them. And so they were both of them were raised in public school, and my dad, looking back, is like, there was lots of bad experiences. I was bullied. They taught you evolution and all this other crazy stuff. And so who wants to send your kids to that? So my mom came home, and that was kind of a step of faith to that was a big portion of the household income at that point.
Yeah.
My dad's just a farmer working on the farm, which sometimes is not very profitable,
Right.
but it does keep you busy. So that was a step of faith, and God honored that, really, really blessed us in that, and blessed the farm. And I never felt like I never felt poor growing up. We never struggled to make ends meet in that sense. And
Always good food on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is being able to look back now, and as a parent myself, and making some of those bigger decisions in life, and walking with God, and looking back and seeing His faithfulness in my parents' lives and in their decisions and in my upbringing. That's been a blessing, and I guess that's probably shaped me somewhat in my own faith and following God and my desire to serve Him.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, are you like late 20s, early 30s?
I'm 28.
28. Okay, that's kind of what I figured. So you're like 8 years too old to be a son of mine. I have a daughter that's turning 20, so I'm trying to think, like, we're at that stage now. I talked to Joshua Steele about this, and I talked to Nathan Pearl about this a fair bit, and I've talked to plenty of people in my circles. Is many of us, we grew up either very, very religious or way off in the world, so to speak, and into drugs and alcohol and whatever else. I personally was very religious. And then when I became a Christian, it was like extremely eye-opening. Everything that I thought I knew about the Bible was either tainted with tradition or false teaching or even outright sin. And now all of a sudden my mind was being shifted. It was like a full 180 where everything was new. I mean, things looked different, things felt different. The clothes I wore were now allowed to be different. Like, there was so many variations now where all of a sudden the lights came on. But our kids aren't going through that. Our kids knew the gospel from very young on. They were good for the most part. My kids haven't been rebellious. They haven't tested the world. They haven't gotten overly religious. And yet I want them to come to Christ with a passion. I want them to have that joy that moves them to ministry. And so then when I look at someone like yourself, 8 years beyond my child, 9 years maybe, my oldest, and you seem to have a real genuine passion, not only for Christ and the gospel, but for bringing it to the lost in the world. So can you pinpoint a time when the cross became relevant, or when what you were hearing, the truth of it, really became something for you and not just something that you were hearing your parents listen to? Or is that too complex a question?
No, yeah, no, I definitely relate to that. And I watched your interview with Joshua Steele, and I enjoyed that. And I've heard his testimony a few times, and listened to some different things that he some of the things that he's shared before in his own experience actually were helpful for me.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up and in my own faith journey. I guess you'd say. But there are definitely times that stand out when I was as a kid growing up and even fairly young that were key moments on my own personal journey that we all have. You can't just ride into heaven on your parents' coattails. And there are these moments that will stand out. And one of the I think the earliest one would be, I can remember one time, and I don't remember what exactly the Sunday school lesson that week had been, but I just remember later on in that one week thinking back, and I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and thinking back on that week's Sunday school lesson, and the gist of it was the gospel in some form. And I like I said, I can't remember exactly what it was,
Yeah.
but I do remember thinking about it, and it was on my mind, and realizing that that my relationship with God is going to be dependent on my relationship with Jesus. Like, he's the one who died for me, who restored that, and I need him to be a part of my relationship with God. And like a 6 or 7 year old, I didn't have a total understanding of every
Sure.
aspect of the
Yeah.
gospel, but and I can't put it in exactly the words I would have put it into at that moment, but I do remember thinking about that, and I remember saying a prayer, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but I know that the gist of it was that acknowledging my own sinfulness, my own need for Christ as my savior, and desiring that and asking God for that salvation that is offered there, and to have I guess ultimately to have that relationship with him through Jesus Christ. And um, I look back at that point as, if there's one point that I'd point to and say, I think this is when I was born again. I was only 6 or 7 years old, so you can argue about it all day, and that's fine. But I could acknowledge that I think I was born again at that time. Like, after that, I looked at the world and it was different. Like, there's no longer the dirt inside of me. Everything outside looks clean. Everything looks beautiful, and the sunbeams carry joy, and just like not as afraid of the dark as I was before
Some
that.
rest and peace, eh?
Yes, yeah, and so feeling like, and I am at peace with God, and
Yeah.
that's when I can say I first felt that was moving forward from that moment. And there were a few other times that stand out, that were significant. And one of them was another time at Sunday school. They did a gospel presentation where they gave this demonstration, and they had these different cups of some kind of, I don't know if it was water. I'm not sure what chemicals were used in this, but they had one cup of water that basically represented me, represents us. And it looks clean and pure, but then you put a little bit of sin in there, and now it's tainted, right? It looks a little
Yeah.
dirty. It's a little off. You wouldn't want it. You wouldn't pick that up and drink it. You'd think, what is in there? And then they said, okay, now let's add a little bit. How can we get this cleaned up again? And so they said, let's add a little bit of, they had a cup that was labeled, I don't know if it was labeled getting baptized, or they had one labeled, let's do some good works, let's give some money, and one of them said going to church on it. And when they picked up that cup, I thought, oh yeah, that's got to help. That's got to at least help a little bit, right?
For sure.
I'm a little kid, I'm sitting in Sunday school, we're going to church, we're Christians, we're believers, this is a good thing, right? Going to church is a good thing. And they put a little bit of that in there, and it didn't help at all. Like, everything they added just made it worse. It didn't help at all. And that was something that was, part of me growing and understanding the gospel, and part of me growing and understanding the human condition, and realizing, oh yeah, like that doesn't help at all, right? That only helps us going to church, reading the Bible, praying. Those are things that only help us to see more our own need for God. They can never take it away. They can never restore that relationship. And realizing that as a little kid, realizing that just because we're good people and we go to church, and as a part of the family, I'm a good person, I'm going to church, that isn't what makes me clean and pure and whole inside. And I think that's something that's important for every one of us individually. We have to realize. And as a kid growing up in a Christian environment, Christian home, that was important for me to be reminded of. And I'm very thankful that I was able to see that, and that stuck out. And then how ultimately, you end up with this really dirty cup of water, and you think, how is this thing going to get clean? And then they had another cup that said, I don't know if it said Jesus, just Jesus on it, or the blood of Jesus, and they poured that in there, and suddenly it's
Came
totally
clean.
clean. I'm not
Nice.
I'm not sure how you do this. I should look it up sometime, because I would actually like to do that.
Yeah, that'd be
Give that
great.
demonstration. I think it's super helpful for me as a kid. It was awesome to see. But that's another thing that stands out in my mind that I look back at, that that shaped my journey. And then I guess to answer your broader question of, okay, that was part of me coming to God and coming to faith and having salvation. But then what is, moving from there, having a passion for God and for sharing the gospel and for the eternal things, where did
Right.
that
Yeah.
come from? How did that develop? And I get asked that question, and I have to say that I don't know that I can pinpoint necessarily just one moment that would be, what caused that. I think that I was always more sober-minded than your average kid. And maybe that's just the way my brain works a little differently. I don't know. But I feel like I was always more like, I can remember being like 11, 12, 13, 14, and reading Ecclesiastes or hearing teaching on Ecclesiastes and thinking, yeah, everything is vanity and vexation of spirit. And the only thing that matters is the few things that actually are going to matter in eternity. And I don't think that's a normal contemplation for
Not for a
a kid
12, 13-year-old.
Right. So I guess I was unusual in that. One thing that I do remember is listening to a teacher who said that, the only things that matter are the things that are eternal. There's only three things that are going to last forever. God lasts forever, his word lasts forever, and the souls of men last forever. And those three things are the only things that really matter in eternity. Everything else is temporal. Everything else is going to pass away, and it's going to be burnt up. Those three things are really the only things that matter. And looking at my life, I'm a very, very logical, math, science oriented person. So logically looking at my life and thinking, okay, if I want my life to have matter and have meaning, and I want to do something that's truly meaningful, then those are the three things I need to focus on, because everything else is vanity, it's vexation of spirit, it's going to burn up. And so I think I came to that conclusion at a unusually young age. But of course that's true for everybody. It doesn't matter what any of us do, what we build. Only things that's going to last forever is what makes an impact for God and for the gospel, and what brings, affects the souls of men. And so yeah.
The Apostle Paul puts it this way. He says that while we're looking at the things, not the things that are seen, but the things which are not seen. The things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen, those are eternal. So you and I look at each other even through the screen, and we can kind of catch a glimpse of each other's actual spirit and soul, maybe through our eyes and our interaction, but we're looking at a camera, so it's not quite the same. If we're in person, we can get a little more connection. But really, we're only seeing the body. We're not seeing the actual person, right? So to see that this person here is an eternal person encapsulated by a temporal being, a temporal body, and that's like that across the globe. So I find it interesting. I think I mentioned this to you last time as well, that Michael Pearl gives off this very rough, rugged, tough kind of persona, right? Where he's out in the woods, he's throwing tomahawks and knives, dressed in leather, big long beard, doesn't care about getting dressed up, just really rough, kind of redneckish. And yet it seems like I've heard him talk several times, kind of almost affectionately, towards what he labeled as nerds and geeks. And I found that interesting, because I often have overlooked nerds and geeks, where like they're not as cool, maybe they're not as relevant to social settings and whatever else. But I think he saw something even 20 years ago, that the future of not only the world and progress and technology, but the future of reaching the world with the gospel might very well be largely done via the internet, via techie guys. And so I think he was kind of leaning that way, saying, man, if I can get a few of these nerds and geeks to understand and know the gospel well, they could power out the gospel in ways that he couldn't, I can't, many people can't, right? So you strike me as a bit more of a nerdy kind of geeky
Yes.
person, right? The sciencey math kind of person, right? So how did it come about that you got connected with Mike then?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and that's
It
totally
wasn't
true.
an insult.
No, no, no. I don't. For a while, that's what Debbie called me. He's our geek. So,
Okay.
so I'll take that. But no, yeah, and it's true that they have had that kind of vision for, hey, this is in a sense the web and technology is like the invention of the printing press. There's so many
Right.
new ways, so much more efficiently to get information to people, and when we're sharing the gospel, that's an important part of it. That's not all that's there, like you were saying, personal interaction that we get to have and touch another person's spirit and their soul. That's very important too. But a big part of it is getting information around the world. And that's what technology has enabled us to do like never before. And Mike and Debbie saw that coming. If you've ever read Debbie's book, The Vision, that's the whole premise of the storyline is that it's going to be people that can use technology that'll have an opportunity to reach so many people. And so yeah, that's interesting. I got into technology personally because it was something that I have a natural aptitude for. I enjoy figuring that kind of stuff out. I enjoyed programming, and it was something also that I could do from home. So I didn't have to have the gumption to actually go out and get a job. I could just maybe be lazy, and I could sit at the kitchen table with my laptop and um,
Yeah. And your
make money that way. So I
mom was kind of that way, right?
yes, yeah. So I started doing freelance programming and web development, and so I was building websites and resaleable software that I could sell to people that they could install on their websites to add different features. And I was doing that for a while, and I was enjoying it. But there was this longing to do something more. And one of the cool things about freelancing and doing it that way is I could control my own schedule. I could control my own time clock. So I could spend a lot of time studying the Bible and just reading the
Mm-hmm.
Bible. I had, hours set aside every day that I would spend in studying and in reading. And I'm so thankful that I did that and used that when I was young and didn't have all these other responsibilities that can take up so much time as a parent and
Little
husband.
tougher now, eh?
Yeah. Um, because at that time I could sit down and read 10 chapters and then another 10 chapters, and an hour or two goes by and it's not a big deal. So I was doing that. I was studying the Bible and learning a lot and growing in a lot of ways, but and doing the freelance programming. But I was realizing, like, I enjoy building this stuff, but the other side of me that's saying, yeah, but a lot of it doesn't really matter, right? The only three things that matter are God and his word and the souls of men. And I didn't want to spend my time doing something that's, in the end, has no eternal significance. And so that was something that I went to God over, I was praying about and seeking, where do I move forward? I could see different possibilities, different opportunities, and I wasn't sure exactly where am I needed, where are my skills that I have so far needed. And so I spent some time in prayer about that. And I remember there was a period of a few months that I went through some real soul searching and real really earnestly seeking God in that and saying, I don't want to still be doing what I'm doing. I want to find a way to use my time to build technology that's going to reach the lost.
Right.
And so and after a little while, after a few months, I remember that period, and then it kind of felt like God's like, okay, there's going to be an answer, but I just want you to keep being faithful where you are. Like, keep using your free time to study and to grow, and just kind of bloom where you're planted for a little bit longer.
Right.
Be patient for a little bit. And so I got to a point where, okay, I felt like that's kind of the answer that I have right now, and so that's what I'm going to do. And there kind of probably a few times before that where I went through something similar, but I remember that one time specifically. And so I was like, okay, I'll be faithful and I'll keep learning new technological skills, and I'll just keep moving forward. And honestly, I think it was only a couple weeks later, really, that God started reminding me, hey, No Greater Joy, they need a tech guy. And they'd actually been looking for someone for a while. They've had some different people that
They put ads out in the magazine
yeah,
and stuff.
yeah. They had some different people that were working here that were doing some of the tech side of things, but there was nobody that really had a dedicated tech skill set that could kind of own that department. And so they'd been looking for somebody. They'd put it in the magazine, and actually my dad at that time had said, hey, why don't you send in your resume. And I looked at kind of what skill set they were looking at. It's like, that's not it's not a perfect match for me.
Okay.
So I didn't do anything about it at that time. But then it was about a year after that I'd gone through that period of seeking God over that, and then God starts reminding me, hey, they're looking for a tech guy. And I'm like, well, okay, yeah, they're looking for a tech guy. I'm not sure that should be me. And then we get the magazine in the mail that day, and it's talking about, hey, we're looking for a tech guy. And then it was Thursday, and at that time Mike was broadcasting live from the door every Thursday evening. So they're brought, we tune into his broadcast, and he's like, hey, we're looking for a tech guy. We're always having technical difficulties. We need somebody to come down here and figure this out. And there was, I don't know, maybe some third thing, I think that
Started feeling like you're kicking against the pricks.
yes, yeah. And so that night, I remember one night I was just like, I couldn't sleep. I was like, God, I think this is what I need to do. I need to contact them and send them my resume. And I think that's what you're telling me I need to do. So, I like the next day I was like, okay, I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to pray about it a little bit, and I'm going to do it. And so I sat down and started composing an email, and to Debbie saying, hey, you don't know me from Adam, but I have some tech skills, and here's a little bit about me. I'm a homeschool kid and growing up on all your guys' materials, and I don't have exactly the skill set you're looking for necessarily, but I can learn to do probably whatever I need to. And so I sent that off, and as I remember distinctly when I hit send, getting ready to hit send on the email, just the feeling of a peace that God is telling me, hey, this is you're doing the right thing. This is what I want you to do. This is where I want you to be. I want you to be at No Greater Joy as their tech man. And so basically, before I sent in my resume, I knew that I was going to get the job, even though to me it didn't really make a lot of sense. Like, I live in Maryland, 12 hours away from their office in Tennessee.
And how old were you at the time?
I was 20. I was about 22.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I was 22. So I was still working from home and hadn't moved out and everything yet. So it was also kind of a big step for me going from, it's not at a super young age, but also growing up from a conservative background, not being sheltered exactly, but not having as much of experience, hadn't had an outside job, still living at home. Moving 12 hours across the country was still a big deal. So it kind of didn't make sense. Like, there's got to be somebody in Tennessee. There's got to be somebody closer to them that has the skill set that they need. But anyway, after some back and forth, coming down for a visit, and them testing me out a little bit, I ended up coming down here to work full time eventually. And Debbie still teases me, like, you knew that we were looking for somebody for a whole year before you contacted us. Just the other day, she's like, she wouldn't let me forget that.
Okay. Then they put you on a trial period too, right? That they kind of forgot about?
They did, yes. Yeah. Hiring a kid from across the country that they'd never met before. They wanted to put me on a trial period, understandably, to see if I actually knew what I was doing and whether everything was going to work out. And at the time I was just getting my driver's license. So they're like, is this kid normal? Is he, super lazy, or why is he just now getting his driver's license? In fact, later Debbie told me, I don't know if we would have hired you, but when your dad came, he was such a stable, normal guy. We figured it's worth taking a chance on his son.
Well, I mean, if you look at a lot of the kids in our day and age, anything from like 18 to 22, 23, they're super inactive. I don't mean just that they don't do a lot of stuff actively. Some of them might go play active sports, but they don't take action. they don't have ambition. They don't seem to be decisive. They don't want to go anywhere, right? They just kind of hang out, and
Yeah.
they're not making moves. So for you to finally just kind of make that strong decision, I'm going to move across the country. I'm going to do this geek thing, and I'm going to get my
Yes.
driver's license. Like that's a big step for sure.
It
Very
was.
action like.
Yes. Yeah. No, and it would have been very hard for me to do that. I would never have done that if I didn't absolutely believe that God was, going to kick me in the seat of the pants if I didn't, basically. Uh, and it's taken, actually for me getting married and having kids and everything to finally grow up to where being more action oriented, right?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no. So I did that, and they said, okay, here's a 90-day contract for a trial period, and so about 5 months, 6 months later, so much longer than 90 days, one morning Debbie comes into the office and is like, JD, I just remembered that it's been more than 90 days and we didn't tell you whether we were keeping you or not. Like, I guess we all decided that we were. And so, and I actually initially I was working part-time, and then at that point she said, so yeah, we're keeping you, and hey, do you want to work full-time and you can take over more of the good and evil, managing the good and evil project? And I was like, sure. So yeah, that's the story of how I came
That's
here and
awesome.
got to work with the Good and Evil comic Bible, and managing. I manage the printing of it around the world, but the biggest part of what I do that no one else here as the skill setter is involved in is building out the website that hosts the Good and Evil book, and then building the ads and different things that we run all around the world, that in many different languages, I think over 45 languages now, that
Right.
say, hey, here's, you want to learn about Jesus or you want a free comic book, you can get this download. And we've had, in 2022, we had over 10 million, I think over 11 million people that clicked through those ads and went to the website to get that download. So
How many?
over 11 million
Whoa.
people.
See, this
Yeah.
this is
So
the
to
part
be,
that I really want people to know and understand. Like, you are not necessarily going to be a preacher. Although you speak well enough, maybe you could be a preacher. I don't know. But someone like Mike, obviously very gifted, very knowledgeable, very
Mhm.
passionate, and he's got this fairly large platform. And then a guy like you comes along. Some people may be listening to this think, well, I don't have any skills, I don't have any gifts, I don't have any abilities that can really reach the world with the gospel. Someone like yourself, a self-proclaimed geek or nerd, comes along
Yeah.
and now projects and amplifies not just Mike's voice, but the publishing of that Good and Evil project into 11 million people's lives on a scale that you won't even be able to see or understand what kind of
No.
impact that's had, obviously. But just to be a part of that, like, there's so many variables and so many ways in which we can step up and do something that feels maybe insignificant, but it could have massive impact. So this is what I want people to hear, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's amazing to be a part of that. And you're right, I can't really grasp the significance of that. Like, I sometimes remind myself, like, one day I'm gonna get to heaven, and there's gonna be this whole crowd of people from many, many different languages and people groups and tongues and nations, that part of their journey to Christ, part of them getting the gospel was, I had a part in that, and I
Yeah.
never met them or knew them or anything, but I got to play a part in that, and that's amazing. That's, to me, that'll be glory to be able to see the people that are going to get to come into the kingdom, because of some small part or large part that I got to play.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing for Mike and Debbie to be able to see what we've been able to do over the last few years. I mean, that has been their dream, and for Mike to come down to the office and say, "Wow, you guys are reaching more people than I've I've ever reached." That's amazing. Like, that's their dream, has always been to, buy 1 million tracts and give one to every prisoner in the United States, or somehow reach the world. And they've now have the platform through No Greater Joy, and the personnel now to be able to do that,
Yeah.
to realize that dream of reaching the world with the gospel, while they, sit and have coffee and giggle, and give us direction and stuff. But they get to basically retire to, not, they're not retired by any means, but to enjoy in their old age seeing the fruit of a life of faithfulness, God rewarding them by magnifying their ministry even as their own ability to, go and speak different places and so forth is not as much as it was before, and
Yeah,
so to be able to be part of that is an honor for me.
that's awesome.
It's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
I guess maybe we should even give a bit of a background for those of people that are not familiar with No Greater Joy or the Good and Evil Project in
Mhm.
particular. But I know, like you mentioned in there, Debbie and Mike both often prayed for years for money. I mean, Debbie talks about filling out lotteries and stuff, trying to
Yes.
get money so that they could get these chip tracks into people's homes. And so that kind of spurred their thinking and kind of set them on a trajectory where they eventually one day were going to put the gospel in comic book form. And they found a guy, Danny Bulandi, I think his name is, who used to
Yeah.
draw for Marvel Comics and stuff. And so he drew the pictures, and it was originally just a black and white Good and Evil. I remember getting that probably 15 years ago, something like that. And then they eventually made it into color, and it's become much more user friendly that way. But then now the big platform, the big push seems to be the online version of it, right? You were describing a little bit about that last time, how you can get it on your phone and flip through pages and stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The online part is a big, really what we're pushing right now, because right now there's more interconnectedness, more people all over the world have smartphones. People that can't afford their next meal sometimes have smartphones all over the
Yeah.
world, and that are often internet connected, or sometimes they have access to Wi-Fi or whatever. And so, but the internet might not last forever. There might be world wars, things might fragment, the technology, may not remain stable. We don't know what it's gonna look like in 5 or 10 years. But right now we have a brief moment where we can use that. And so that's what we're trying to do is maximize what we can do with that right now while we can. And that's kind of been one of the biggest things that I would say I've learned from Mike and Debbie in terms of ministry is they've always been wanting to do, and what they learned earlier on in their ministry is doing missions outside the box, seeing where God is working, how he is working
Mm-hmm.
in this moment, and not getting necessarily stuck in one particular way of doing it, but
Interesting.
realizing being sensitive to the moment and sensitive to, okay, here is a door that's open, let's go do it. And learning from some people that were willing to think very much outside the box, like, well, the best way to get tracks to this part of Mexico is to go and throw them out the back of the end of an airplane instead of going from village to village and handing them out. So we'll do that. And actually got to meet one of the pilots that did that. And it's actually it is effective, believe it or not.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But doing not just doing missions as usual, doing missions outside the box, where instead of me going to school and linguistic school and all the different things I need to do to go to another part of the world, and although that's a useful part of missions, I sit here behind a computer and I can reach people in places that I'd get killed for preaching the gospel on the street in. And that's pretty amazing.
That is absolutely.
Yeah.
I really like that point that you made there, that they kind of roll with whatever the world and technology or advancements is kind of using. Like I think of often the street preaching analogy. Back in the 1800s, if you wanted to get something known, you go to the town square, you stand on a soapbox, you announce the latest news. That's how you got your message across. And that seemed to be kind of standard for many, many years. And even to the point where back in the 50s and 60s, when Mike was coming up and many other preachers in the 60s, street preaching was still very vibrant and alive, and it was effective and useful. I'm not saying that it's not today. I know plenty of people that still go out on the streets and probably have fruitful, effective ministries. But it seems like in the last 20 years in particular, the main mode of communication and the most effective way of seemingly getting into people's homes and into their minds and hearts has been video streaming or online somehow connecting. It's become kind of like the town square, right? And so now we have our soapbox. And I used to do some street preaching too, and people just almost constantly walk by. Very, very few people would stop and engage and actually listen to what you were saying. Whereas if I put out a video, I put it out there and hundreds of people stop and actually purposely click on it, and they engage themselves and they click on the link like they're coming to it. And so I don't think video and stuff, as I said before, can replace personal connection, but video and online links and QR codes and stuff. As much as I don't love the trajectory of where that might be going technologically, it
Yeah.
seems to be very, very effective way of communicating the gospel, and it seems to be the typical town square anymore, right?
Yeah, no, that's for sure. I've preached on the street in Nashville. It's only about an hour and a half from here, and you can go to Broadway, and there's always people there. And I can go to Nashville in an afternoon and preach on the street and pass out tracts. And I've seen some good fruit come from that and conversations and things. Um, but I realized I can go do that, and I can pass out a few hundred tracts in an afternoon. But I can reach more people in Egypt sitting here in my pajamas than driving to Nashville on less money, and that's hard to believe,
That is.
but it's true. And so realizing where I can, with my skill set, make the biggest impact that I can make for the gospel, is not necessarily, on the street in Nashville, or at a tent revival, or some other more traditional form. It's sitting behind the computer and offering the Bible as a comic storybook that brings somebody into it and lets them not just get the gospel that they might receive from a gospel tract, but hear the story from Genesis to Revelation, the story of God's plan and who He is, and the story of mankind and who we are, and
Yeah.
our need for a savior, and to have that laid out point by point in a way that is really building somebody's entire worldview, so that they're going from, even if they're, whether they're a Christian or a Hindu or an atheist, they're realizing, here's the message that God has from His Word, and able to, once they see the story of Jesus dying on the cross and His resurrection, and what he accomplished for mankind, that they will have a deep understanding of the implications of that and what that means, and they'll have to decide how they're going to respond to that.
Yeah.
And so being able to provide that to people in a digital format that they can download onto their smartphone and read one frame at a time in Arabic or Hindi or some other language, that is the impact that can have on people. And maybe a lot of that is planting seeds, right? I don't know exactly what the harvest looks like. Sometimes we have people
Yeah.
contact us and we get to hear their story of how, wow, they came to faith through that. But there's also a lot of people that someday down the road, they're going to meet with somebody else who's a secret believer, and God's going to use them to witness to them, and they're going to already be primed for the gospel.
That's right.
So we're one part of a bigger picture, and that's what constantly I'm reminded of as I do this. Is I feel like, talking about everything Mike and Debbie have done and their vision, and it always reminds me of the verse that says, other men labored and you're entered into their labors, like Jesus
That's
told
right.
his disciples at one point. And it's a blessing to be able to do that and rejoice in seeing the harvest, and be planting seeds and watering seeds and preparing preparing for that harvest that will all the laborers will get to rejoice in together.
Yeah.
And that's I don't know, if you ask me, that's where it's at.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a very good friend right now. They're in training with what formerly was known as New Tribes Missions, is now Ethnos,
Mhm.
and they're studying to go. And right now, they're thinking probably they're going to go southern Mexico. There's still multiple unreached tribes there. People that don't have the Bible in their language, people that don't have a solid biblical church in their culture, and so there's plenty of need still for people to uproot their lives and move across the globe and do extraordinary things like that. But some of the stats that you were talking about last time, if you could repeat some of that, I'd really like it, because there's countries that it is illegal to come in as a missionary. I mean, you go
Yeah.
there and you proclaim that you're there as a Christian missionary, or sneak in as a teacher, and then it gets known that you're a Christian missionary. Your life is in jeopardy. It's like a serious thing. And yet some of those countries you were saying are the highest statistically, the ones that are clicking on these links and reading the good and evil, right?
Yeah, yes, they are. Yeah, I think in the last month, I think right now as I speak, our top country is Pakistan, and Pakistan is, you could go there and preach on the street and do some different things, but it's dangerous. It's and there's lots of persecution, particularly for people that are converting. There's lots of persecution on them, from family members and so on and so forth. And the government is not always able to control different radical groups. So the fact that we're able to give people an opportunity hear and respond to the gospel and the word of God in the privacy of where, their own bedroom or wherever they happen to be using their smartphone and decide to click on that ad.
Yeah.
There in Egypt, in Algeria, the government has been closing more and more churches. Now Algeria is 99% Muslim, so there's not a lot of churches there to begin with, but there was a few dozen, and over the last year or so, they've closed down all except for, I want to say, just like 9 of them, like very, very few. And just the government comes and locks and puts a seal on the door and says, yeah, you're not allowed to have a church here anymore.
Wow.
But last January, the government closed down, I forget how many churches. And for the next month and a half, maybe it was 2 or 3 months, Algeria was our number one country that was responding to our ads. And the government closed down, I don't know if it was a dozen churches that could have held a few hundred people. And every day we were having literally thousands of people that were clicking on our ads and downloading the Good and Evil book and getting the gospel. And so I was like, let them close another church down.
No
right?
kidding, Maybe they can meet in secret if they have to, but the word's getting out.
Yes. And in Iran recently, we were getting a huge response there as well. And really, if you've ever looked at Voice of the Martyrs has like a map where it shows all the different countries of the world that it's either illegal or very restricted and dangerous to own a Bible. And if you look at that map, those are the places basically that almost most of those places, those are the places that we're getting the most response from. Our top 15 languages last year, every single one of those countries, top 15 countries last year, every single one of those countries is on that map of places that's incredible, that the gospel is going through the Good and Evil Eye Missions project. Whether it's Afghanistan, Iran, India, there are places, some of them are places where you can get the gospel, and some of the places like Afghanistan where the Taliban denies that there's any believers there. But I know that there is because we've had people contact us that got born again through the I missions, and people that we've been able to connect them with other believers through that. So that's awesome. Yeah. So it's amazing. It's a privilege to be able to be a part of that.
No kidding. And you said there's 40 some odd languages now fully translated?
Yeah, we actually have close to 70 that are fully translated, and we have about 45 that are online, and we're working on getting more of them online. Once they get translated, I have to take the translation and format it so that it's in a format that is digitally optimized for viewing on a smartphone, because most of the people, some people are accessing it through computers, but most of the people, a lot of people around the world, they can't afford to have a personal computer, but they have a smartphone. That's your lifeline to the world. Yeah. So that's where they're reading it on. So once we get a language translated, we format it and get it put online. And there's a whole team of various people that help with different aspects of that. And then I get it put on the website, and we get the ads put up and start rolling them. And then we adjust our ad, how much we're spending on each language based on what kind of response we're seeing, and how much it's costing per person that downloads the Good and Evil book. If it's costing 5 cents a person, then that's pretty good. We'll spend a little bit more on that one. If it's costing 10 cents, we might spend a little bit less. And I think overall last year it was in the range of between 4.5, 5.5 cents per time that we got the gospel to somebody using the iMissions program. So that's for about the cost of printing a tract here in the United States. We can give a digital copy of the whole Good and Evil book to somebody in some persecuted nation somewhere in the world.
Yeah, and they're not just picking it up and throwing it in the trash, hopefully. Like they actually went to the site and clicked download, right? Like it's a little bit more of an engagement on their part too.
Yes. So
that's really neat.
Yeah.
So you're working on many languages too at the same time, I'm sure. So what's the process like that way? If you've got a lot of those Middle Eastern countries and some of those really persecuted nations already in print and online, did you have people there translating it for you? How do you verify that it's actually
Um,
being translated well and stuff?
yes, yes. That's important, and that process kind of looks a little different from one language to the next. Um, we have a few languages that are like on our wish list of, okay, these are ones we need to go and get because they're major languages and we could be advertising them. And one, for example, is Pashto, which is a language that is spoken in Afghanistan. So we have to go out and find somebody who speaks that language or a team of people that can translate it. And right now we actually have a team of a couple guys that are in Afghanistan that are working on that translation. And then when they get it done, they'll send it to me, and I will actually have a partner who's coordinating with them. But they'll ultimately it'll come to me, and then I will send it to probably a group of believers that I got connected with in Pakistan that they're solid believers and they have experience with translation and proofing and that kind of thing. So I'll have them go over it and edit it first, and then we'll be able to take it and format it to use it. Um, so sometimes it looks kind of like that. Sometimes we have to go out and find somebody, and sometimes someone comes along and says, "Hey, here's a language I'm interested in translating, or we are interested in printing. Do you have that translation?" We're like, "No, but thanks for volunteering. you, can, you
Yeah,
can you can you
exactly.
can translate it. We're happy to have that happen." Um, so recently we wanted to get Kurdish translated, and we didn't know somebody that speaks Kurdish, so we contacted some of the churches in Nashville. There's a Kurdish church in Nashville,
There you go.
and through that we were able to find somebody who could do the translation. There's actually 15,000 Kurds that live in Nashville, so
Hmm.
that is currently on my sitting on my desk that I need to finish formatting it so we can get it printed. And if possible, we'd like to connect with some ministries that work in Nashville with the Kurdish people and make it available to them if it's something that they might be able to use
That's
there.
awesome. So
And
cool.
so yeah, so it varies the process, but that's the generally, we find a translator and then usually try to find a proofer to look at it. Excuse me. And then from there, it's formatting it and as a book if we're going to print it, or formatting it online so that we can at least use it with iMissions. And sometimes we get one translated that our intention is we don't necessarily have specific plans to print it, but we can format it to use online, and that doesn't cost us much to do that. Printing it, you gotta that's a lot of more logistics and coordination, and you have to find somebody who's going to distribute it. Um, so sometimes we're just more focused on let's at least get it done and use it for iMissions.
Nice. Very good. Yeah, I know last time I kind of started off this conversation a little bit sarcastically about my own background, my own Low German Plattdeutsch language, right? We would be considered Russian Mennonites or Russian German Mennonites. Our ancestors come from Russia and Poland and Germany. And during the Second World War, if I'm understanding correctly, a lot of them came over this way, maybe even during the First World War. And many of them ended up in Manitoba, which is several provinces over in Canada. And then they felt persecuted there, so a lot of them moved down to Mexico. Some moved down to Bolivia. Some ended up in Paraguay, and kind of scattered all over. Now I think there's roughly 400,000 Plattdeutsch, Low German speaking Mennonites in the world, and it's only in the last 20, 30 years that they even have some version of the Bible translated into Low German, because they always just read High German. High German was church. The catechism was in High German. The songbooks were in High German. The Bible was in High German. And then when they came to Canada, back to Canada again, like my parents, then the preachers started preaching in Low German, Plattdeutsch, but still reading from the High Germans. They still won't use the Low German Bible, and it's not translated. I personally don't think it's translated very well anyway. So there's a version of the Low German Bible, and then there's another version of the Low German New Testament. But by far the majority of Low German Mennonites, Low German speaking people still don't really know the gospel. And as you get further south, it feels to me like they become darker and darker. Like there's colonies of Mennonites in Bolivia where you've maybe heard these stories many years ago. There was recently a movie made about this where some of the men in the village were gassing women and then going in and raping them. Like the most horrific things that you can imagine happen in our so-called good, peace-loving Mennonite communities, right? And so they're in desperate need of real truth being exposed to them. I've seen pictures and videos of young men getting beaten, like bruised and bloodied, because they dared leave the church, or they dared go to a Bible study, or they shared the gospel with their brother or sister, or they brought a Bible home, or any number of things like that. The community will kind of rally around and try to take care of this issue. But in those types of circles, it kind of produces curiosity, kind of like you said in that which country were you saying where the churches were being shut down?
Uh, in Pakistan and India, that kind of thing can happen. Yeah.
Yeah, so same thing here. The more they seem to persecute it and oppose it, more and more the young people are starting to be interested. Where there, a couple of years ago, we knew that they were passing around little mini MP3 players and headphones, and people were hiding them in their barns, and they'd go out to milk the cow and listen to some audios, right? Listening to the Bible, it maybe, or some sermons. And so something like this, it's kind of taboo. You shouldn't draw pictures of Jesus and the apostles and so on and so forth. But I know that many of those young men and women, maybe even the older men and women, if they found on their phone an option to read in their plain low German language, it could be pretty big too, right? So I'm not proficient enough at Low German. I know some men who are working on a Low German translation of the Bible that's much truer to the original text, I believe, and they're doing a good job of it. But if somebody all of a sudden hears this and is like, how do I get involved? What do I do? Where do I start? Do they contact you, or how does that process begin?
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it be for that language or anything that somebody would be interested in, printing it somewhere around the world, or if we have a certain language available, they can contact me. My email is just jd@nogreaterjoy.org, and they can contact me, and I'm happy to chat about whatever. But yeah, for the Low German. I actually, we have somebody who was working on it, and I'm not sure how actively they're working on it. But so that's one that maybe in the works. But if somebody wanted to has skills in translating, or is proficient enough in the language that they'd be interested in helping work on a translation like that, totally they could contact me, and
Nice.
I'd help them get started. And yeah, absolutely. No, that'd be awesome to make it available. And it's interesting that you say that it's a little bit offensive or edgy to even have pictures of Jesus and the different apostles, because that's also true in a lot of Muslim cultures, right? Like they'd never make an image of the Prophet Muhammad, because
Right.
that's so sacrilegious. And so often when we hear stories in Pakistan, for example, where a kid is given at school a copy of the Good and Evil book, and then he brings it home and starts reading it, and the parent, the dad takes it away and he's all upset, but then he ends up reading it himself. And they're angry, they made pictures of the prophets, but it's so intriguing and so interesting, right? They just have to read it.
That's
And
cool.
so it's interesting how even cultures or places where you wouldn't think a comic book would have that kind of penetration, it ultimately does, and people, it's still attractive to people, and so that's cool.
Yeah, very exciting. Back to you a little bit. You said you're married, you have one child, or did you say two?
Yes, I'm married. I got married 2 years ago, and I have a little daughter. She's just turned one, and I
Nice.
also have a stepson who's 8.
Okay, very exciting. Yeah, man, life is gonna get busier for you. Hopefully, you can still continue to dedicate to your time and energy into pushing this out into the world, and who knows, maybe somebody listening to this conversation will kind of be like, click, there, I now know what I'm doing with my life, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been a amazing journey, an amazing blessing, and like I don't have to worry about a lot of different things, because I know God has me here. And so, in getting married and having a family and thinking, wow, how am I going to balance the ministry and the family life and all those things, knowing that I can focus on my family, I can make sure that I give them the time that they need, but that God's also going to provide the other people or whatever is needed to make sure that I'm able to do what I need to do as far as the ministry as well. And seeing Him provide, seeing Him um, help me go through different situations, or just um, be there and like smooth the way for me to be able to continue putting the energy I need um, into the ministry and into getting the gospel out, as different other responsibilities come, and different things. It's been um, it's been a beautiful journey along with him, and
amen.
growing. And so yeah, anybody who is interested in doing something for God, go for it. He is there to help you. He's there to guide you. He's there to bless it. And at the end of the day, that's going to grow your faith. It's going to show you how faithful he is, and you're going to love him more. And
well, you get to join in what he's doing, right? That's the
yes.
incredible part about it. He's doing it.
Amen.
Was there anything that we kind of forgot about, or anything that you were really hoping to touch on? Maybe some links or something, and we can leave links in the show notes as well.
I can totally send you some links to put in the show notes. Again, my email is just jd@nogreaterjoy.org for anybody that wants to contact me for any reason. And the Good and Evil book, goodandevilbook.com is one of the websites that you can go to. We actually have several different websites, and they're all basically mirrors of the same site, but that you can go to if you want to look at it online, see what languages there are, download it, whatever. And there's also a link there. You can get the app for your smartphone, whether you have an iPhone or have an Android. You can get the app for it, and through the app, you can also then share the app with other people. And that's in itself can be a great witnessing tool. You can show it to somebody on your phone, and even if you don't speak their language, you can scroll through the list of languages that are available. And Mike does this all the time. If he is at the gas station and there's an Indian guy there, you can go and show him, hey, do you speak any of these languages? And then have them scan a QR code with their smartphone, and then they can get the app themselves and install it.
That's cool.
So yeah, you can get the Comic Book Bible app, and
right on.
We can put some links to that in the show notes.
For sure, we'll do. That was it. You're good. I mean, I think we wrapped it back up again and got your personal story, got all the good and evil stuff in there. So I'm sure there's plenty more that could be said, but
yeah.
Right on. Thanks a lot, JD.
Yep.